Hello everyone and welcome back to Future Now, a webinar series by Ad News and Facebook. My name is Asya Ben-Mejdoob and this week we're diving into disruptors. Joining me to set the scene is Chris Sarandos, Facebook, Disruptors and Venture Capital Marketing Lead. Chris, are disruptors still more digitally savvy than legacy brands in 2020?
I would say yes, they are, but that gap is definitely closing and it's closing very fast. A lot of retail brands have had to undergo digital transformation this year as a forcing function of the fact that stores are closed and people are not able to go out and physically get the things that they want. And so they've had to invest a lot of time into improving things like their e-commerce experience, mobile UX, and also digital marketing. So while these aren't things that are necessarily part of their core competency, they're starting to get much better at them. And disruptors are looking behind and seeing these retailers quickly catch up to them.
Can you give us a couple of examples from the US?
Yes, absolutely. So I would say that Walmart has been one company who has really leaned into their digital experience and offering a really seamless experience through their app, through their mobile website, and also through their social channels as well. They have really invested a lot in their e-commerce experience. They've built their own grocery delivery and grocery pickup business as well. And these are all things that consumers have really been leaning into during COVID-19.
And what is the biggest change that you've seen in 2020 and what are the implications for businesses?
That's a really great question. So 2020 has really shown just how fragile supply chains can be. Speaking for the US specifically, we saw that COVID-19 really kind of had a mixed impact on a lot of these disruptor and direct-to-consumer businesses. On one hand, we saw people really severely impacted by the fact that their supply chains were overseas. They couldn't have enough product. They couldn't keep up with the existing demand that was out there. And so they had to either pause their marketing campaigns or really lean into product categories in which they could actually get supplies. On the other hand, we've actually seen a lot of subscription businesses really excel during this time. A lot of people, people who might be a little bit more hesitant to go into stores are leaning much more into these subscription brands because they can get delivered directly to their home. And so for them, they actually couldn't even keep up with the amount of demand that they saw. They had to pause their marketing campaigns because they couldn't even fulfill the organic demand that was out there. And so regardless of if there's one that was impacted by their supply chains being overseas or ones who had domestic supply chains and couldn't keep up with the demand that was out there, kind of the bottom line is the same. A lot of these disruptor brands didn't have contingency plans in place. They didn't think about secondary ways that they could get products out to consumers. And so I think kind of the learning moving forward is that a lot of disruptor brands are really going to have to think about how can they more accurately forecast the demand that is going to come from consumers, but also have contingency plans in place for their supply chains.
What will the next wave of disruptors have as their unifying USP?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and I think one that's going to be more and more important as we look into the next couple of years. What we're seeing is that the disruptor and kind of DTC landscape is incredibly saturated. If everybody is offering the same product or services to consumers, brands have to think about what is going to be the thing that helps them stand out the most. And I think there's two things here. I think number one, what consumers are really going to connect with is a brand that is built on a core purpose. And when I say that, I'm talking about serving a purpose to society beyond just making money for their shareholders and for their investors. These are brands that really align themselves to social issues, things around the environment, or giving back to their communities. I think what we have seen during the time of COVID-19 is really the brands that are true to their brand purpose and kind of the value that they serve to society have really stood out. we have seen countless examples here in the US of brands who've acted on their core purpose, really activated their core competencies to contribute to COVID-19 relief efforts. These are brands who have done things, whether it's ranging from, organizing funds and giving them to charities in need, or actually shifting their entire supply chains and kind of their production process to produce PPE, hand sanitizers, things that can kind of help combat the spread of the virus. Those are the brands that I think have really stood out and really have resonated with consumers.
If I were to give you $10 million to start a disruptive business today, what would you start, Chris?
Oh boy, that is a very, very loaded question. I think for me, it really is interesting because, like I said earlier, there are so many brands that are popping up overnight. The barriers to entry really have gotten so much lower. But pretty much every single category or vertical or industry has been disrupted in some way, shape, or form. I think one that really, really stands out to me right now is kind of the telehealth industry. We have seen during COVID-19, there's a lot of emotional stress. There's a lot of things that people are dealing with because it really has upended everybody's lives. And I think similar to kind of the excitement and the possibilities of remote work, this idea of telehealth, I think, is going to be really important moving forward. If people are no longer tied to a physical location to have to go see their doctor or go see somebody for counseling, really kind of the sky's the limit in terms of where they can get access to care and support. So that would be the industry that I would look at first and foremost. I think if I were given $10 million to actually invest in the business, I would do a couple of things. First and foremost, I would want to make sure that the company is really built on a foundation of data and making sure that we are leveraging all of the latest marketing technology and analytics to really understand what's driving the business, to really understand what is working and what's not working with consumers, and to make sure that that data is really central to our decision-making and how we kind of build the business and move forward. The second thing that I think I would do is, this might be, I might be a little biased because I'm in the marketing field, but it's really leaning into marketing. I think, the brands who are really standing out are not only taking, their community and kind of their core purpose, but they're using it as part of their marketing. It's part of their creative strategy. It's part of really who they are as a brand. And so I would double down on making sure that we have an amazing marketing team, making sure that we are really leaning into creative to make sure that we're standing out in a very, very crowded landscape.
You mentioned the divide between e-commerce and bricks and mortar businesses. How do you see that divide playing out in the next 2, 5, 10 years?
I think it's going to be really interesting because I think what we are kind of seeing as a result of the mobile phone, and I think just brands coming online more and more, is that the line separating in-store retail and e-commerce are going to blur a lot more than they already have. In fact, I would almost venture to say that at this point, it's all just commerce. It doesn't matter if it's happening in store or if it's happening online. Digital is going to play a role in that purchase process in some way, shape, or form. And I think what we're seeing is actually kind of this really interesting kind of intersection between digitally native disruptor brands and traditional retailers. The disruptor brands are investing more and more in building these physical retail presences, and retailers are either acquiring direct-to-consumer disruptor brands or they're investing more in creating their own kind of direct-to-consumer business line as well. One really interesting experience of where we have seen a direct-to-consumer brand invest in their retail experience is actually in the mattress space. So there are a couple bed-in-a-box disruptor brands who have built physical retail stores, Casper being one really great example. I think about it as being this completely reimagined in-store experience. So rather than going into your traditional mattress store where it's just fluorescent lights and a bunch of mattresses laid out, and you can go and lay on them. Casper has actually invested in a retail experience that lets people actually go and take naps. So they have very ambient lighting, they have really cool little nap pods. It really is kind of this really interesting experience because people still get to interact with the products and try them out, but it really is kind of this reimagined retail experience, and it's helping Casper kind of elevate their brand as well.
Thank you so much, Chris, for that fireside chat and setting us up for our panel. Let's meet them now. We'll start with you, Gay.
Hi, so my name is Gay Leroy. I'm the CEO of the Interactive Advertising Bureau in Australia. So that's the main industry body for digital advertising companies that work in the space.
Fantastic. And what about you, Rob?
I'm a co-founder at a Melbourne-based startup, Quadlock, and we make a smartphone mounting system for people with an active lifestyle.
Awesome stuff. And we'll finish with you, Henry.
Hi there, I'm Henry. I lead the Digital Disruptors team at Facebook. It's a collection of e-com direct-to-consumer businesses.
Fantastic. So Rob, how has your business been impacted in the last few months during COVID-19?
Yeah, well, we've seen pretty substantial growth over the last 6 months due to COVID, sort of in two ways. One way is that just there's more people going online to shop, and e-commerce is really booming, but probably something that really relates to our product is that people use it outside, getting fit, on their bicycle, things like that. And that kind of segment has boomed during this time with people at home in lockdown. So as different areas around the world have gone into lockdown at different points in time, we've really seen sales boomed in those areas. Yeah.
That's great to hear. Now, Gay, you guys put together a report prior to the pandemic around disruptors. What's changed and what's stayed the same?
Yeah, so we put out a report called Direct Brands Report 2020 in February. So I guess it's a good benchmark of what the world was like before COVID-19. And Australia overall had been pretty, I guess, slower in e-commerce to date. And that's over the last 10 years, we've been waiting for it to sort of take off. COVID-19, I guess, is an unfortunate way for that to happen, but we saw definitely a big uptick in people buying online, people going online. As Rob said, there were just more people using digital media and purchasing. So during the last period, we've seen, I guess, a new range of brands. A lot of Australians looking to deal with local brands, particularly because of delivery concerns of overseas brands, and a lot more people trialing e-commerce, whether that's with a new brand or an existing sort of traditional bricks and mortar brand, but huge uptick. It's interesting watching the numbers now as, I guess, the world starts opening up again, and you're still seeing some of those people who have trialed disruptor brands for the first time, staying with those and continuing those habits.
Fantastic. And Henry, how have you seen the disruptor trends play out in Australia?
Yeah, look, it's been really, really interesting. Because we work on a range of businesses and business models, we've seen different people have different areas that they've really accelerated into. So when we've seen some of the brands that Gay was talking around, and obviously with Rob on the call, really start to feel that extra impetus of more people coming online and more people being comfortable with buying things online. And then we've seen some, sub-verticals, especially around fitness, where people have been at home and this service that is there and available and is often brilliant has just been available to a whole new range of people.
Rob, is the gap closing between disruptor brands and legacy brands?
I think for the legacy brands, with a catalyst like COVID hitting, you don't have the time to catch up during the crisis, really. I mean, they're trying to do different initiatives, things like that, but really I think the big wins probably come from the brands that were already in the sort of set up in a way to operate in an optimal way during a time like this, because then you could just hit the ground running and just do more of what you're doing at a perfect time to execute on those strategies. I think what will happen is this, what's happened in the world will mean that you get these bigger legacy brands looking further towards the future and go, okay, where should have we been during these times and where will we be in the future? So I think it's not necessarily closed now, but I think this is just going to bring whatever's going to happen in the future will just happen sooner because it's sort of pushing us forward a couple of years to where we should have been. So, you know, some of these smaller brands probably grew to become bigger brands that they would have been anyway in a couple of years. But then some of these big brands are like, okay, this maybe highlights more so what we need to do and what we need to be looking at. And the some more legacy brands, I suppose, maybe where they should be. And then at a point in time, there may be a closing of the gap. And, you know, new disruptor brands, they don't have the legacy. They don't have to, like, they know who their customer is. The customer is the end user. The older legacy brands, sometimes the customer is the store, the retailer. Their customer is not necessarily the end user. So it's a bit of a different way of thinking.
What are some of the strategies, that you've unleashed during this time that have been successful for you as a disruptor brand?
Yeah, I suppose things that work well for us is things that we're already doing, but just tailoring them to this time. So, you know, we do a lot of ads, we do a lot of direct response type advertising, and it's just tailoring our message that everyone's on Zoom. Yeah, we're an outdoorsy brand, but we also have a desk mount that charges your phone wirelessly. Why don't you use that when you're on Zoom and get a second screen, more real estate, that kind of thing. Just quickly rolling things like that out in real time when things are actually happening and it's a need in the market, not taking a month or two to do something like that, taking a day or two to do it, getting it out there and getting a direct response, learning from it and doing more of it. It's what we already do, but just the response we saw was, yeah, just escalated. When it first kicked off COVID, people's expectations are pretty high on your shipping. And it was a big task to communicate to people right up front that, hey, there's this thing going on. It's called COVID. You probably know about it. But what this means is that what you could expect before this, going into this period, you can't expect the same level of service. And we're sorry. And we just had to over communicate that on our websites, in our EDMs, just everywhere we could, in the order confirmations, everything, product pages, just trying to set that expectation. Hard thing to set though, when it's actually unknown. We didn't know how long some of this stuff would take, but we just had to be as open as we could. And now I think the consumer's a bit more educated. Everybody knows that in their region at their time, if something's going on, okay, we're going to have to wait a little bit longer.
Yeah, it's about being responsive to the times. Gay,
Yeah.
What particular categories have you seen really grow in terms of online during COVID-19?
There's been a range. You know, we've mentioned fitness already, but a lot of home delivery of food. So food kits, as we had that initial wave of everyone trying to make sourdough. Then they got a little bit sick of that, so they were looking for meal kits. So that's definitely taken off. Some really interesting areas around sort of arts and craft and the parenting area. And then some ongoing ones that I think will be really interesting, sort of education for parents and children, sort of self-serving areas. Whole lot of really small providers who have found ways of keeping people entertained. And, you know, a lot of these brands have, or all of these brands, one of the things that differentiates them is having that first party data and that understanding of the customer. So they can, you know, as Rob sort of mentioned, they can change offerings, they can change messaging because they've got that direct relationship and can communicate directly.
Well, one of the changes that we're starting to see is these online disruptor brands establish a physical or offline presence. Do you see that trend continuing, Gay?
I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about this. So the IB in the US did DTC research, so direct consumer research in 2019, asking the founders what their priorities were in growing the business, and setting up a physical store was number 3 at that point. I'm not so sure now. I definitely think, well, commercial real estate is cheaper, so there's probably an easier way in. But I think we've trained consumers to be able to purchase online. Possibly there might be more partnerships. The click and collect style of things with big retailers has really taken off. So I'm not going to future gaze too much, but I'll be fascinated to see if that's still a leading strategy.
Henry, where does the competitive advantage lie now?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I think the first thing is that we've seen around a third of Australians in research that we've conducted with Kantar recently state that they have bought things online that they normally would have bought in store. And then the other thing is that we're seeing is that around 1 in 5 Gen Z are using Instagram shopping as a platform now. So the first thing is we've seen this big shift online and with consumers' purchasing behavior. In terms of the competitive advantage that we're seeing, we're really seeing this idea of flexibility. So what we saw very quickly was that, everyone had to start working from home. So if you're a business that can react to that, which these disruptors really can, then they could meet consumer demand very quickly. The example that I saw within a matter of weeks, that the Koala were offering a work from home desk. That was something that they weren't even thinking about, but they met the consumer demand and they had the ability to move very, very quickly. The other thing that we're seeing is the idea of discovery and discovery commerce. So we're using the machine learning that's intuitive to Facebook to go out and meet where consumers and people are spending their time on our different platforms, whether that's through shopping or where they're spending times in newsfeed. So it's really around that idea that if you can move fast and if you can use the platform to help people discover these new products that you offer, there's a real competitive advantage there.
Henry, as someone who's across multiple disruptor brands, what are the key questions or queries that you're hearing about during this time?
Yeah, we're increasingly talking around future-proofing. So already we're talking around what's going to be happening moving through into the next year, and a big piece that we're talking around is around signal loss, signal resilience, and that really comes around from cookies and the degradation of cookies and iOS 14 coming in. There's a lot of technological advances that are coming in across the industry, and it kind of comes back to the point around privacy and that kind of movement towards there. So the questions that we get are, first of all, hey, what do we do about this? And then we try and work with them on that. And then the other part is, for these disruptive brands is, if they're growing, and we do see a lot of them growing, how do we keep doing that? So in the short term, there's probably that first wave of consumer coming and buying the product, but then what's that second wave? And so part of that conversation is, how do we make sure that we're planning for that longer term conversation? And a big part of that conversation, and we kind of, part of what we're talking to many of our partners around, and Rob's a great example of this, is the idea of cross-border. So really getting that product out to a wider audience in multiple countries. So we're really helping in those main ways. And then there's the basics, am I spending the dollar best on your platform? Help me measure that, help me prove that. And that comes back to we're probably answering those questions before, but even more so now. Because it's so important that you make sure that you're spending and you're really aware of what you're spending and the return that you're getting.
Gay, if you were a disruptor brand right now, what would the key strategies or metrics be that you'd be utilizing?
Yeah, so I think one of the tricky things will be trying to understand that lifetime value of some of these new customers coming in. So really putting a lot of emphasis on setting up your systems that you can track these new customers in the right way. Measure how many times you need to communicate. Rob was talking about some of the messaging that's been needed during the delays. How do you ease that off? How do you get the tone right? Really work on the brand tone. A lot of the work that we've done with disruptor brands is, there's customers, there's a certain level of expectation that they have. And then the differentiator that direct brands have is in their tone, in their values, in the founder stories, in the differentiators. And as we've seen from classic marketing, the differentiators are the ones that will really keep them loyal and keep customers coming back, because it can feel, I think Australia's less commoditized in the direct-to-consumer brand, the disruptor brand, than some of the other markets. So I think local founders have a great chance of keeping those customers. One thing I do love about disruptor brand founders, marketers, whatever we want to call them, is they are closer to a classic marketer, which sounds odd, but compared to the big companies, because they're really not only in touch with promotion, so they need to obviously understand how much it costs to get a customer, where they need to advertise, but all the other 3 Ps as well. So they understand pricing, they understand distribution, and they understand product. They're close to all 4. So it puts them in an incredibly strong position to change and grow.
Fantastic. Rob, we've talked a bit about the role of purpose in forming a business. How do you see that playing out for you and your business moving forward into the last quarter of 2020?
Yeah, well, I suppose, especially in disruptor brands and newer brands, and it depends. Like, we're 8 years old now, and I think our purpose is pretty simple. It's that we make a really good product and enable people to use their technology where they couldn't before in what we think is the best way possible. So we're doing that, and we're just rolling that out into more and more and more applications where people need that sort of functionality. I think the thing is, for different disruptor brands, it depends on your product and on your offering. We have a fairly unique product offering where there's not that much on the market doing it the way we do. We sort of invented that category. So in our position, that's probably enough. But depending on your product, if you're more of a Me Too product, it's probably even more important to wrap something else into your brand's offering, because maybe the product is similar product to 10 other businesses. So if you can wrap something else into it, some other purpose, it's definitely going to help.
How does purpose play out for brands in advertising? I might throw that one over to you, Gay.
Look, it's incredibly important, but I will say only if the sort of hygiene factors are there as well. So, you know, as I was saying, you really need to make sure you have a good quality product, you deliver on time, all those real basic things, and then purpose comes up underneath that. I think we've seen, you know, some really interesting examples like the Who Gives a Crap toilet paper, you know, and it's only working, like the purpose is absolutely essential, and it drives people to buy with them. But it's also because they've got a good product, they're delivering, they're communicating, and they're cheeky. So I think that tone added to purpose is incredibly important. So I think there's always going to be good jobs for people who can write good copy, who can communicate well, and really cut through some of the more bland messaging that's out there.
Absolutely. And I mean, toilet rolls during COVID-19.
Perfect.
Was there anything more luxurious? Now we'll throw to my final question, which is my favorite question. I'm going to ask each and every one of you this. If you had $10 million to start a new and disruptive adventure now, what would it be? I'll start with you, Rob.
To be honest, I wouldn't try to follow any real trend or anything like that. I think I'd just sit on that cash and wait for a need or a solution to present itself that is a product that really solves a real need and a real problem within the market that's underutilized and underserviced at that time. I think I'd sort of walk around with that idea in my head, and then when I see that thing, probably then jump on it.
And Gay, what about you?
So I'm going to do a head and a heart answer. So that my head says I'd start an e-commerce agency, so one that can really help the smaller brands go to market, get their catalogs up, get their offerings up. My heart, I've been playing around with, I think we've all watched everything on Netflix, on all the streaming services, and we're looking for more entertainment, a different entertainment at home. So I'm going to have a home delivery pinball machine service that rotates every 2 months. You get a new pinball machine. So for something new to do, that's a bit more active and a bit more fun.
Fantastic. And Henry?
Men's beauty. I think I don't know if it's actually that original. I think that this is, you know, to Rob's point, this is probably a trend that is emerging, but it seems like it's going to be a real thing, and whoever can capture it and communicate it and the points that are all being made and get it out there, I think there's something massive that's going to happen in the next few years.
And beauty as a category is booming during this time. So definitely watch that space. Thank you to all of you for joining me today, and to all the viewers at home. We'll see you for the next episode soon. Bye-bye.